This is the Totality experience. I'm Britt Wilde, and we're about to have some vast conversations with epic guests and their uncensored honesty. Let's go. Hello, Portal by Alex.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. I want to get straight into it because there's a lot that I want to chat to you about, because I find you absolutely fascinating. You hold so much information in your noggin. And every single time I observe you on social media or have a conversation with you, you blow my mind with something else. And the first question I have for you is, obviously you are incredibly skilled in the work of like neurobiology, you know, like everything. You know so much about the male and the female brain, how they can complement each other, how knowing about the different elements of the male and the female brain and how they best operate. What the hell got you into that?
Well, it was two things. One was obviously I'm in a relationship with a male. So it was like question mark, what's going on?
Tell me more about what you're doing right now. I don't get it.
And the second part is that I have two sons, and I kind of have always grown up feeling like there's some kind of disconnect. It's like we can chat with our girlfriends and be like, oh, you totally get me. Like, why doesn't he understand what I'm saying if you get me?
Mm-hmm.
And this is like played out in my parents' marriage, with my brother, with male friends, with whatever it is. It's always like, I feel like we're kind of getting each other, but then it feels like there's this big elephant in the room where it's like we're not really getting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it would play out in my relationship in a lot of ways where I would get upset about something, just that classic thing. It's like, but why are you upset? And it's like, well, you don't get it. You're traumatized, you're this, you're that. I'm just so on top of like my self-help work and right.
Yes.
And then I have two sons and I'm like, do you know what? One day I'm going to have an adult relationship with these boys. I need to understand like what's going on here, because it's too common of a problem to be that everybody's traumatized and women are just better because we do self-help, right?
Yes.
And I started really looking at, okay, well, if our hormones are different, how does that affect our brains? And it actually completely changes the whole trajectory of our values, of how we communicate, of how we filter information. And when those things change, it's like, oh, well, now how I perceive a situation is completely different simply because of our neurobiological differences. So that's really what made me start looking at it. And the answers I was finding were like, oh, thank God. And it felt so relieving knowing there's so many things that I don't have to take personally, because I would notice like either in a relationship or even just simply watching, oh, my friends' daughters are doing something differently to what my sons are doing.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? We have the same parenting values. We have this stuff going on. And it's not just with my sons. It's like, oh, it's a lot of people's daughters. A lot of people with boys, like, oh, boy mum life, they're so active, they're so this, they're so that, which isn't to say that girls are not active, but then you'll hear she's so emotional, it's this, it's like a lot that way. And I was like, I'm seeing this correlation now in how it's playing out in real life. So that's pretty much how I got into it.
Well, I love that. And super fascinating. I was listening to a podcast with Zach Bush, MD, the other day, and he was talking about how, amongst the kind of like the pharmacology world, there is literally no drug that has the exact same response within a male as it does within a female, because everything that's happening on a hormonal level is completely different. So he was saying, when we're looking at peer-reviewed studies, but we're also looking at the control group, which might be like 80% men in some cases, you actually can't go and take that information and apply it to a largely female cohort because they're going to respond incredibly differently. And in that moment, I thought of you because I was like, yes, it comes down to this hormonal experience, which is that, yeah, if my husband and I take the exact same whatever, we're both going to have two completely different experiences. And I thought, wow, isn't that life? It's so interesting, the way that the hormones are kind of playing out. So what were those predominant things that you found? Like, what did you actually find when you went into that?
So kind of the first things I found was that, which was this woman who became fascinated with the female brain and studied it. And she's done so many peer-reviewed studies. when she was in, I guess, college in America, she actually asked, she was like, oh, like, excuse me, sir, what happens when we look at the females in this study? And he's like, don't be silly, we don't study it on females. And it's like, hello. And we've just come to realize, like, oh, do your exercise around your period, do like all these different stuff, all these different medications. Men are always studied because hormonally they have the same 24 hours consistently.
Yes. So
Women,
there's less variables when you're studying a man versus when you're studying a woman who has like an extreme amount of variables on the daily.
yeah, well, we change every 24 hours. So if you're going to study something on a woman, you'd probably have to wait for that same 24 hours once a month. And it's just like difficult. And then you'd probably have to test
Yes.
at different points in the cycle. And one of
Mhm.
the first things that this woman actually researched was the fact that why do depression and anxiety rates suddenly skyrocket in females at 12 or 13? It was really bizarre. It was like boys and girls would have similar levels of stuff, and this is also looking into their childhood and traumas and stuff like that. But at 12 or 13, it would just suddenly double compared to boys. And that was because that's when they got their period. That's when they started their menstruation. And the biggest thing that I saw was um, every single fetus is a female up until like 7 or 8 weeks. So it has female genitalia, female brain, everything about it is female. When that sort of XY chromosome kicks in for a male, that chromosome will then release testosterone. What testosterone does is it comes in and it defeminizes that entire fetus. It will actually reduce certain areas of the brain, and it will expand aggression centers, sex centers. Those areas will double. It will grow a penis, grow testicles. It actually changes the not only just the physical body, it changes the structure of the brain. And the way that testosterone comes through puberty, throughout a boy's life, is it actually enhances those circuits that are built in when they're a fetus. And every child, so basically there's this thing called infantile puberty. And infantile puberty means that up until girls are 2 years old, essentially they're pumped with a lot of estrogen as they would be during puberty. After that, it stops. For a boy, it's different. He's pumped with a lot of
Why does that happen?
it just sort of encourages those brain circuits to sort of like cement that way.
Got it.
And
Yeah.
it's like, this is you as a female in this female body. And I don't actually know why it stops, but basically during childhood, it stops up until we get to the teen years when we go through puberty. For a boy, it's different. So for a girl, that's 2 years. For a boy, it's like 8 to 12 months tops.
Right.
And it basically is what cements those structures. So, for example, a female's brain would value, if you look at a female baby, she's really interested in engaging with eye contact, in faces, in those sort of things. Male babies, less so, their brain values something different. Boys are really into movement, right? Watching a tree move, watching the fan turn around.
Mhm.
And a lot of people think, like, I see it very often actually in people who have sons and daughters, like, my daughter's so special. She like looks at me in the face, and I'm thinking that's so interesting. She's,
Mm.
let's just say maybe she's an old soul, but putting that aside, it's like maybe you as a female, her way of communicating with you appeals to your female brain. It makes you feel
Mhm.
connected to her. Whereas your son doesn't feel any less connected to you. It's just that he's interested in making things move and observing the world around him. And it doesn't mean that either's wrong or that either's better or worse. It just means that when we understand what's uniquely going on, it can change how you take something. And that's what I found.
Totally. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, hilarious because I'm obviously a girl mum and you're a boy mum, so this is just super cute. I was with a friend who has a little boy, really similar age to my little girl, just earlier this week, and there was a few planes going overhead, and she was like, "Look, planes!" And her son was like, "Whoa!" And I was like, "Luca, look, planes!" And she goes, "No."
Yeah.
She was like, "Don't care. I'm not interested." And I just thought that was, yeah, again, I thought of you because I was like, yeah, it's very, very on brand. You gave an example once that I really loved. You said, if you give a baby girl, I think you said like monster trucks, like if you gave her monster trucks, there's a reason that she would make all of those monster trucks have a relationship and they'd all start talking to each other and like playing cute. And if you gave a little baby boy a Barbie, he'd probably make a sword out of it. And I thought that was really funny. Can you explain why that happens. So again, like, yes, this movement thing, yes, like the emotional connection, but like, tell me what's happening in the brain. Because the reason I'm asking is because I'm thinking about a lot of the current narratives that go around, which is like, you don't assign a gender. And of course, like anyone who's listened to previous episodes know that I don't believe that. But I want to hear from you, like, why does that happen? Like, if we're not assigning and everyone can just be everything, why does that happen?
Well, certain centers in the brain will form larger or smaller depending if you're male or female. So a female brain, and what I always tell people is the gender stuff aside, and
Mhm.
choosing and all that sort of stuff, that aside, we are born into male or female bodies simply because we have a biological purpose.
Yeah.
Our brain is primal, it's nearly 2 million years old, it's wired for the same thing. We're just in a modern life right now. So I'm speaking more from that lens, whilst
Mhm.
I'm all for do whatever you want. I'm speaking from this is how the brain forms, right?
Mhm.
So a male brain, in that situation, it's like a male brain has larger aggression and sex centers. And for a male, it's like we all hear about alpha males and that sort of stuff. They're obsessed with movement and being strong and doing all that stuff because primarily that puts you up the hierarchy.
Mhm.
If you are a female, your brain is wired to support you in reading faces, in being nurturing, because your body is biologically on a primal level born to reproduce. So you need to learn how to read a baby's face. You need to learn how to do that stuff because they're nonverbal. So
Mhm.
regardless of what you choose to do in your life, your brain has been born in nature to sort of fulfill a biological purpose.
Mhm.
So when you see a little girl who is like taking trucks and, swaddling them and putting stuff in a carrier, regardless of if it's a sword, like she will assign something to it simply because the centers in her brain for nurture are larger. You're seeing what her brain values. Larger
Yeah.
centers in a brain mean that we value something more. For a
Mm.
boy, if he's going to have larger aggression centers, what's he going to value? Oh, let's defend my territory. Let's use a sword to do stuff. That's what his brain values. And I think we've gotten to a place in society where it's like we want to sort of shove biology aside, but it's something that
Mm.
we're all born with, and there's nothing wrong with working with it. I actually think when you try to push things away and resist it, it becomes worse.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, fighting nature is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
That's a hard opponent. I want to know, obviously, I'm a mentor to many, many women. I love hearing from them. I hear so much about, you know, relationships, how they're relating to their significant other, which in my space with my current client load is largely like male female relationships. I hear a lot of the same things, which is, you kind of touched on it earlier, which is like, he doesn't get me. He doesn't help around the house. I feel like I do everything. He never clocks when I'm emotionally, off, all of those things. And you're like smiling because you're like, I get it. Like, you speak to this so beautifully because you're like, I don't actually deal with those problems anymore because I understand the male brain. What is it about the male brain that you now understand that means that you're not dealing with those, like, really stereotypical, I don't want to say cliche because I feel like it minimizes the experience of that people are having, but like these incredibly stereotypical experiences that we have as women in relationships. What do you know about the male brain that has helped you not experience that anymore?
Yeah. Well, do you know what? It's two sides of the same coin. It's not only knowing the male brain, it's understanding, oh,
Your own?
I
Yeah.
value connection, and also my brain is perceiving the environment completely differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that personally. When I understand now, we're looking at the same thing and seeing two different things. And that was a big one in sort of not demonizing either my partner or my dad or just men in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually started to go, fuck, I actually feel so sorry for you that you get called lazy and that you don't help and you're always being told you don't love me. And they're like, oh my God, I do. They're actually showing it in ways that we don't receive. So then they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're showing us they love us. We're not picking up on that. And you end up in like a stale ass situation. But one of the things that I did learn about the female brain too was that when we feel like it's not really about the socks on the floor and that sort of stuff. It's when we feel like there's emotional distance that sets off an alarm in our brain because we're
Mm-hmm.
wired for that connection. which is also why you'll see like women will have like an argument with their partner and they're like awake at night and being like, fuck you, I can't believe he's, sleeping and snoring, and we're like, you don't even care, like I'm like torn up about this.
Yeah.
Because our brain is valuing connection in two different ways. And for us, when there's emotional space, that feels scary. And when it feels like, oh, me doing all this stuff is actually creating emotional space because I'm not feeling seen or supported or anything like that. That's one part of it. The other part of it is actually learning to communicate that across to the male brain. And because they're perceiving it differently, we need to understand, what does your brain value? How do you, respond to your own needs and that sort of stuff? And how can I get—
So what does their brain value? Like, give me some solid evidence of like tell me what you mean. So let's say I'm walking into my house and I'm hoping to come into an environment that's incredibly, presented beautifully. I want to be connected with. I want him to feel excited that I'm home. I get none of that. I'm pissed off. How am I communicating that to the male brain?
This is like a really hard one because for me, it's like, oh, what do I keep for my programs and what people pay for versus what am I just like tossing out there? But I guess an answer that I could give is, on a very primal level, if men are built for hunting and women are built for gathering, your environment, when you perceive it, is seeing lots of different little things. You can walk into a room and 10 things scream at you.
Mm-hmm.
If a man's brain is built for hunting, he's built to actually zone in on one thing, and he has a different visual and different auditory system. So he hears and sees differently to you too. Mm-hmm. So if he's walking to the bathroom to have a shower, the focus is on the shower. The focus is not on, I see these socks and these things on the floor that need to get done. They have a very laser, like whatever their focus is, that's what it's going on. And everything else gets blocked out. So if you're like hunting for an animal, you're zoning in on that. You're not listening to other stuff around you. You're not, looking at there's fucking berries over there. You're like, bang. Whereas a female brain, we're built different, right? We're like, oh, I got to gather some stuff. I got to make sure the environment's all good. So the environment speaks to us in two different ways. Mm-hmm. So when we can just accept that and understand it, you're going to get rid of a lot of like, you're like, oh, you're not actually doing that because you hate me and you think I'm a maid and blah, 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 blah. That's just how your brain functions. Mm-hmm. Like they don't, and I often find men don't take it personally that our environment speaks to us, but we take it personally the way that they communicate or perceive that their own environment. Mm-hmm. So that's— But I guess to explain this in the best way, I kind of have to go backwards, because an adult man doesn't just grow up and become an adult man and think this way. This starts from a very, very early age. So what we'll see happen is, for example, if I'm at a play date and I've got my boys running around and I've got my friend's daughter on the slide, what the boys are going to do, they were having a race, and this is something that happened. They were having a race and they run up the stairs, and my friend's daughter's waiting to go down the slide, and they cut in front of her and race down and keep going. And she got upset, and I saw her and she was like a little bit shocked. I'm like, oh shit, And let's just say, for example, if you've got a mum of a daughter who maybe doesn't understand what's going on, they're like, oh my God, those fucking rowdy boys, like how dare they? And they're so rude. Yeah, all the things that we label them. What I'm seeing is, okay, I have two boys where their brain values strength, speed, things to be physically more dominant, because that puts them higher as an alpha male, higher on the hierarchy. Yep. Competition is very important for them in that way, like healthy competition. And they don't have the same ability to read faces that women do, that females do from a very early age. So they're completely single focused on this race, on this competition. They're running up the stairs. They're not reading her face. They're not actually even noticing that this little girl is there. In their mind, they're going, I need to get down this slide and I need to win. So off they go, zoom, zoom. My job, and a question sometimes I get is like, oh, okay, so how do you raise a boy different to a girl? It's like, I'm not raising them different. It doesn't make it okay. What I'm understanding is my son's not a bad person. He's not trying to hurt her feelings. His brain is valuing and prioritizing something different. So he actually doesn't know that just happened. My job as his mom is to get him over and be like, hey, I saw you doing a race, like blah, blah, blah. And he was like, yeah, mommy, I won. Did you see me win? I was like, I did. I did. I saw you win. And I was like, you know what else I saw? I saw that she, like, I'll leave her name out, but I saw that she got really upset. and can you look over there? Look. And she was like a bit rattled and looking sad. And he was like, oh, my job is to fill in the blanks for him. So I go, I know what your brain values, but I also know what your brain doesn't see. So my job is to make you pay attention to her face, because his brain is not made to read faces like a female's is. And he goes,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wow, okay, I've upset her. And I'm like, yeah, do you think we should go and tell her that you didn't mean to because you were having a race with your brother? And he's like, yeah, let's go. If I was to treat that differently in a parenting situation, be like, get over here, we're going home soon, and look what you did, and da da da, that hasn't taught him anything. I haven't built a skill into his brain. But if I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at what's your brain already good at, great. What's it not so good at? Great. Let's build that part up. For a
Yeah.
female, yeah, it's just very
I
different.
really love that, because it's almost like this meeting place of like your primal, natural, biological way of being, and like this skill acquisition that you actually need to hone and refine and craft and develop, build over your entire kind of childhood of those first, however, I don't even know how long, probably forever. Yeah, probably literally from the moment you're born until the day that you die, you are probably developing those skills that you don't innately biologically have. And it is so good, because it's not about, and I think this happens so much as a parent, I'm sure you could probably attest to this. When parents see their child do something that has made another child upset, it's almost like they want to perform for the other parent. And they're like, don't do that. How dare you? And so instead of like actually helping them develop a skill, we would rather reprimand and go home early to like be in solidarity with the other parents. And that's kind of missing the mark. Like, we're never actually going to like build and develop these really well-rounded, emotionally, physically, spiritually kind of, robust children.
100%. And I hung out with a friend yesterday, and it was so nice because it's something can happen with the kids. And we know that our kids don't mean it that way. And our job is to really be, instead of being like, go say sorry and make the whole situation awkward, it's like the way
Mm,
don't make it awkward for anyone. I like to speak to what just happened. Say, for example, the slide. Oh, and in front of the other kid and go, wow, I just saw that they were having a race and they came past you and you got upset. And I saw that you really wanted to win the race. And we're speaking to everyone's experience in a really calm way so that they're feeling the safety in my body when I'm talking about it. They're feeling,
mm,
oh, it's actually okay what happened. It wasn't personal. And I think the
yeah,
trick is always to understand the brains on these fundamental levels, because little girls don't do that. Little girls are more concerned with remaining connected to people. And they're so in tune with faces that they're like, oh, I really don't want to upset this person because it's going to ruin the connection. And that follows us through adulthood. And using the brain in parenting and in trauma, I love to draw like a really clear, distinct line, because you're not people pleasing and doing all that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, it comes into it, but your brain as a female brain is built to avoid conflict. It's built to stay in connection, right? Conflict means disconnect,
mm.
which means less safety. So it's not that people are, oh my God, I'm still not healed because I still want to people please or I still want to make people happy. It's just that that's on a primal level what your brain is wired for, because in
That
primal
is
time, that's what it needs.
fascinating.
Yeah.
That's so good. I'm just thinking, I'm like literally having a brain explosion as you're talking, because what I'm piecing together here is there's so much conversation around like the good girl thing. It's like, you learned to be a good girl. I'm like, maybe they didn't. Maybe they just like being the good girl because it's hardwired in our brains.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not all wound up in like the good girl thing. It's definitely not really been my journey as an adult. But do I like being liked? Of course I do. Do I want to be loved and accepted and appreciated by like people that I value, that are close? Of course I do. I mean, it is. It's just like it's wired into how we operate. It's so true. But I'm having the biggest reckoning right now with all of the narratives around, the good girl behavior and how it's learned. And actually, it's possibly just innate.
Yeah. And I'm like, I love the brain because I can talk about these topics. I can talk about birth. I can talk about parenting. I can talk about trauma. I can talk about male, female, and relationships. Because at the end of the day, knowing the brain gives me access to all of those things in a very different, grounded way. It's not like, oh, no, you know what I mean? We know where to draw the line with things. We know what's actually in there. And I always talk about the brain because everybody has one. Like, we really love to jump to like people pleaser, this, narcissist, that, da, 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 all over the place. And not once have we come back into a grounded position where it's like, what does the brain tell us and what does it do? Because if you don't know that, do I need to stop?
It's just me.
Oh, your camera turned off.
Yeah, it's just me turning off my video because my connection's unstable and it's having a moment. So I just thought I'd give it a sec.
Oh yeah, I thought my female brain.
You can keep talking, like we're still recording. It's
I don't know, I was saying my female brain saw your female face and I was like, something's happened here.
You're reading my facial expression, which was like, fuck, what's happening?
yeah, that little
but it's fine.
But also in the long term, I see a lot of women that I work with, because we're reading faces all the time and our brain is built to sort of read into things and feel into people emotionally. We do this from a young age. So what happens when, a little boy's growing up is he's probably receptive to what's going on with his parents, maybe not in the same way or in the same level that a female brain would be. And I very often see a lot of women in the self-help space thinking like something's deeply wrong and they've absorbed so much more of their environment growing up. And to me, I'm like, that's so interesting. It's because your female brain was always obsessed with how's mum feeling? How's dad feeling? What's this person doing? Just because of that innate ability. So it's almost like you have to be extra aware of these things and extra skilled in understanding how a child brain works in order to file these different things and experiences away, because they're absorbing so much all the time.
That's really fascinating. And I want to go into this thing that you often talk about, which I bloody love, about trauma. You're constantly talking about how trauma is a whole system. And I think, a lot of the ways that I have perceived so much, I think especially of like the social media conversation around trauma, is about how it's this one thing, trauma is trauma, and you can deal with it in a really clear one kind of way, and then you're, air quotes, healed. You talk about it in a lot more of a robust and multidimensional way. Can you talk to me a little bit about your beliefs around trauma as a whole system?
Definitely. So that was, first of all, my personal experience. And then what I observed a lot of was, oh my God, I'm going to go and I'm going to have a past life reading to break my karmic ties because that's what's affecting my current day life. Oh, do you know what? It's all my mum's fault because da 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 da. Oh, I just did like 17 breathwork sessions. I went and did ayahuasca. I did 43 energy clearings. And I was just like, this is just not when something's here, right? And actually one of the first things I ever looked at in trauma was the brain, which is what's actually going on. What different parts of the brain are involved? What is each of their jobs? And then when I actually saw what happens when we get triggered, I started to notice this correlation that, oh, when you yell at a child or when you do this, that same part of their brain switches off, which is why we retain this experience, because if there's a specific part of the brain that switches off, we don't actually fully process that, right? The brain doesn't prioritize processing that emotional experience. So what happens is that when we have to turn on the brain again, or when we feel calm and safe again, and the rest of the brain comes back online, in different parts of the brain, it's like we have to play catch-ups, which obviously then affects our nervous system. It affects, our energetic body. Everything starts to get affected. And this is how I started to see, I can now tell somebody will do a breathwork session that affects their nervous system, but they've done nothing for their brain to process that. There's no context. There's no, you know what I mean? People, we're breathing, but what are we breathing into? What are we breathing out? And when I started doing portal therapy, which is basically a mixture of a few other therapies that I've learned, I started really seeing this process that would happen when we form trauma. And I started understanding the ego in different ways. And I started seeing that people have so many inner children. We don't have one inner child. We're going back. We're finding 1-year-old you. We're finding 5-year-old you. Like at all different ages, there's something in here. And it started to shift how I saw everything. It started to shift how I saw, well, no wonder you're getting an energy clearing. It's done absolutely nothing for that event or for that inner child, which is actually what's causing that dysregulation in your system, or what's basically leaving an open loop because the brain hasn't been able to file it away appropriately. So it was this really interesting experience where I started to go, oh, okay. And it did feel like I was stepping on a lot of people's toes, saying like, hey, I know as a, for example, an energy healer or a breathwork practitioner, maybe one of the things that people assume they get with you, and one of the things that your modality touches on, is trauma. But to say that I heal trauma or I do something, you actually need to understand what it is. And if you're missing that foundational step of going, oh, this is actually what it is, this is how it plays out in the brain, this is how it plays out in the body, you're not sure where your modality actually touches. You're saying to someone, oh, my modality touches all of those things, but it doesn't. It touches one. And this is
Does
why.
any one modality touch all of the things that needs to be touched for a trauma to actually be healed?
So, well, this is also why I talk to people about what is your definition of healed. I don't have a definition of perfectly healed, because, yeah, my idea of that might be different to the next person. So when I get people into like the trauma program, or when I get a client on, I'm always like, what's your version of healed? Like, what are we working towards? What are the symptoms you're experiencing physically, emotionally, spiritually? That's how we can figure out what tool is going to be required for you. But the reason I do portal therapy is because it touches on 4 parts of the brain at once, and in the body and in the nervous system. So that's my way of going, great, I'm banging out all of these. It doesn't touch this. It doesn't touch what, for example, an energy clearing would touch, but it also doesn't need to, because an energy clearing is more like the downstream effect of what trauma might have caused for someone, but it doesn't penetrate all the way back in. But if I'm going from a root cause approach, then by nature, the rest of that sort of clears itself out.
That's really interesting. I find that incredibly interesting because I think we are a cohort of people who are like reasonably obsessed with a lot of these like modalities. And I've got no beef with any of these modalities, and I know you don't either. But let's say for something like breath work, for example, I've had several experiences with breath work. It's never really been my vibe. Don't love it. I feel like I do it. I have these like these explosive flare-ups of emotion. And then I'm like, fuck, what do I do with that? And it doesn't go anywhere. And I like really related to that when you spoke. I was like, it feels like an inflamed flare-up to me, often if I do like a really hectic breathwork session. Is that what's happening? Like, are we like bringing emotion to the surface and they're not actually like fully processing that, like, as you said, so that then you can file it away into the brain? Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, it's like you give yourself enough. Essentially, breathwork gives your nervous system more space. You can hold more capacity. If I'm saying, let's just say there's a little Brit in there, she's like, oh my God, she now has more capacity. I want to tell her what's happened for me. I want to tell her what's wrong. And she's coming, but you don't have access to the parts of your brain that are going to help you do that. You don't have anybody guiding you through that. We don't have anything to process what she's trying to tell you. That's when it's like poking the bear and going, oh fuck, I don't know what to do. And then feeling dysregulated for days. And this has been a really touchy subject because I love breath work. I fully believe in it. It's something that I know I probably need to do more of, in terms of like, oh, probably should do it for 5 minutes in the mornings. Breathing is incredibly important. And like you said, I don't have any beef with it. I think it's awesome, but used appropriately. I wouldn't recommend using it for that, because people get dysregulated. They feel rattled for days. They don't have an ability to process that. And then they need to go through the suppression process again, which essentially loses trust within the system. So what happens is, in your system, it disconnects all over the place. When we're doing things that we think are helping, but then those defensive mechanisms actually have to double down and push it back away, because it's like, no. We couldn't process that at the time. Now you're doing something else that's not going to help us process it. Now we need to double down on just hiding that and sort of shoving. It's like a little kid that keeps coming into the room.
And then that's why we have people saying things like, I thought I dealt with that. And then it keeps coming back up. And they're like, I thought I was done with that. And then keeps coming back up, et cetera, et cetera. I actually, there is one thing I do have beef with, and that is, let me unleash. No, it's when people say things like, I'm purging. Like it's a big purge. Like I had this session and now I'm purging. You know, they're like sick for 2 weeks. They are like, yeah, as you said, completely dysregulated. For me, I'm like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like any sort of actual healing. That feels fucking terrifying. I don't want to feel like that after I do a session that is meant to like actually genuinely be supportive. Why are we addicted to this as a society? That always really blows my mind. I'm like, are we taking this as a good sign? Is this good?
I think it's our lack of understanding. I think the understanding was like, oh, if I'm not feeling it, then I'm dissociating. If I am feeling it and if it is there, then that means I'm processing it. But this is why when I, for example, take on a client, I'll always say, like, tell me your physical symptoms. And I only want very limited information in the beginning anyway on what's actually happened for you, what's gone down, because your body's already telling me. So when people are, for example, let's just say they do a breathwork session or they do plant medicine and there's this purge, which I also have some beef with. It's like, okay, the purge is actually now your body's like, oh, are you ready to understand and process this? And it's going to be giving us those signals and those things that are like, hey, your brain can't tell you what's happened because it's done a really good job of shoving that away and suppressing it. Your body's held onto it. So now I'm trying to tell you through your symptoms so you can understand what's the emotion linked with this and what's that. It's trying to help your brain piece it together, but the two are disconnected. So, for example, when I do portal therapy, I'm actually in multiple areas of someone's brain and in their body at the same time. So there's communication happening between the two so that we're understanding, oh, this feeling in my body is related to that event and this emotion. And then we do a process of basically, you can't eliminate it, like we can't change what's happened to you, but we can process the emotion that is to be processed, that got stuck when that part of your brain switched on. Now we've switched it back on. Now we need to process it. And when it gets filed away, like the thing I always hear is like everybody always feels so good after doing portal therapy because you actually feel calm. You actually feel at peace. You don't have theory or anything because you've addressed those different layers and those different parts where it's like what I call it is opening a can of worms. And then we have to close the lid. We have to put it away. What a lot of modalities and even talk therapy alone, what it does is open the can of worms and then it just says, oh, fuck, your 60 minutes is up. The breath work's done.
See you in a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're okay. Catch you later.
Yeah.
Very useful. And I even say that about talk therapy because so many people relapse, go back to alcohol, do a lot of things from that experience of opening the can. They don't know how to deal with that. Their body's trying really hard to suppress it again because it's not being processed. Talking as well only switches on one part of the brain. It's not doing those other layers and those other parts. So yeah, it's just a lot more complicated. And if anything is leaving people feeling rattled, unsure, like that's a red flag, like please put that modality down and try something different.
Sometimes I think that the narrative kind of out in the zeitgeist too is a little bit like if it's triggering you or if it's activating you, it's a good thing because you're going somewhere new. And I think it's very easy to get sucked into that trope almost. We're like, wow, I'm activated. It's a good thing. And it's kind of like when we went through this real era in like the personal development space of everyone being like, if that coach activates you, you need to invest in them. I'm like, maybe don't. Like if that person really is actually making you feel completely out of your body and you're feeling like frazzled in their presence, maybe don't keep going there. Like, is it good to be dysregulated all the time? Like, and I know we've personally had this conversation, like feeling stretched is a really different feeling to being like completely fucking dysregulated. Like you can choose to be stretched and tested and challenged, and then you can be dysregulated as fuck, and they are not the same feeling.
Yeah, I always correlate things to people, everything mental and emotional. I'm like, I always compare it to the gym or working out. Do you want to push yourself at the gym? Yes, great. Stretch yourself. You'll feel really good, right? There's that balance.
Yep.
Do you want to be passed out, vomiting? Like, no, right?
No one goes back to those sessions because they're like, it's too fucking hard.
Exactly. And I think there's part of what I like to teach people as well is how to be with those things. Like when I notice I'm dysregulated, I notice I'm triggered, how can I extract information from that wisdom and how can I learn to be with that? How can I learn to slowly stretch myself to understand what that's doing for me or what that's bringing up, but also to make my nervous system feel calm around that and stretch myself into that, because we need to learn how to be with things. But that doesn't mean, if you don't know how to swim, that you jump in the deep end and hope for the best. It means like you build up and slowly learn. You start at the steps or in the shallow end, and you make
start with doggy paddle, guys. Start with doggy paddle.
Yes, like not doing butterfly and
yeah.
Yeah,
out the back.
There's a process to go through, and a lot of people can't hold the fact, and this is what I call emotional intelligence. It's they can't hold the fact that there's a process. It's black or white. It should be here or there. It's actually not, and that's why I like to work with people in like a minimum 3-month setting, because it's like we have time to actually, that really gives us time to see what you're doing and where you need to build up that skill, and where you need to be stretched and where you need to pull back, and what's the foundational stuff going on. Because before that, you're wasting your time. And I often use this example in my courses as well, which is people follow trends, right? Like what's hot right now is maybe like collagen. Everybody's buying collagen powder. Like, I want nice skin. I want nice nails. I want nice hair. Did anybody ever go and maybe look at their diet and go, how much collagen am I getting in my diet? Great. Have I done a blood test? Have I done some form of means test to see, do I even need this? They don't do that. Then they go, oh, fuck, the collagen didn't really work for me. It's like, yeah, because you didn't even know where you started from. So if you're picking a modality or picking a thing, but you don't know what your baseline is, you're just having a guessing game. Like, you're just doing this for fun. It's not, people don't want to peel back, and people hate foundational things. It's like doing squats and not knowing the right form to do them in. Are you going to be frustrated when you don't have like a nice juicy booty at summer? Yeah, you're putting in all this time, this effort, and this money for something that maybe you weren't utilizing to its greatest potential.
Yeah, I really love this. And so I just want to kind of tie the loop on that, because I really love learning about that whole system thing. And so essentially what you're saying is trauma is a multi-dimensional, multi-layered thing that doesn't just exist in one aspect of our brains or bodies. It hits multiple parts. And so when you're using one modality to try and address a multi-dimensional beast, you're always going to be missing the mark. Yeah. So, and in portal therapy, you're going into like all of those different elements to try, or like at least a fair chunk of those elements to actually process that experience. And like the word healing it's hard because, everyone's going to have their own definition, but essentially to not be having the same physical or emotional responses to the same stimulus is essentially something that I would consider like an improvement.
Yeah.
So you've had some level of healing.
Yeah. And it's also building that skill set, because being a human is hard. Like, just because, for example, oh, hey, Britt, I don't know how to do business properly. Can you teach me? That doesn't mean I have a trauma related to business. It means I don't have a skill to do it. And it's like people think because they don't have a skill in something that it's related to a trauma. And it's like I really like to draw really clean, distinct lines between what are you labeling and dumping in the trauma pile and what is actually like a regular human thing. And when you can separate those two, it's like, great, let's process. Like portal therapy gets to the root, right? It's the root cause stuff. So the other stuff should, move along after that. But let's just say, for example, if somebody has gut health issues as a result of like chronic stress or trauma, we can file that away, right? That will also the emotion will move out of the gut. So you'll see an improvement, but that doesn't mean don't clean up your diet and don't take supplement, don't do things that will support you. It's like learn how to use things in unison to sort of, complete the picture.
It's such an understanding thing, isn't it? Because I'm also just going to talk about something else that always kind of annoys me when I see this online, this kind of, this idea of people use the words like being in your body, like getting in your body, and they will go and they will record themselves dancing and screaming and yelling and blah, blah, blah. And then they'll share that. And I'm like, just because you're moving your body doesn't mean you're actually doing anything to process the emotion through your body. And so, a lot of the time I'll have clients who are like, I'm overthinking. I think I just need to like go and shake it out and dance. I'm like, maybe you do. Great. Give it a go. And also, sometimes you're just hitting pause and you're going to pick up that overthinking again as soon as you stop doing that movement. And that's exactly what I was thinking about when you were talking about this whole system thing, which is like, I know it sounds good to go and like get in your body by physically moving your body, but as soon as you stop doing that, you pick straight back up where you left off. Like there's no actual root cause stuff that's affecting an actual lasting and sustainable change in your body. And so I watched this kind of like social media therapy kind of go down around like what being in your body is. I'm like, you know what else really helps is being super fucking practical. And I think this is why I love your work so much, because it's incredibly practical. I'm like, are you overthinking? Great, let's actually implement a physical practice to help you get those thoughts out onto paper, build a process that's going to help you complete them or delegate them or tick them off or, you know, delay them so that you feel like there's less going on in here, because there actually is. Like really getting into the root cause of something. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you, is that yeah, we can do all these things like breath work or, you know, being in our bodies and moving our hips and shaking our asses on social media, or we can actually get into what is actually going on, which is a multi-layered thing. There are so few people doing that.
Yeah, that was like a shock for me. And that's why I almost wronged myself when I saw it that way. I was like, am I missing something? Should I be like shaking my ass and like,
yeah.
Sometimes the most time ever in my body is when I'm laying still. Like it's not, there's no like rule of thumb. Sometimes that's when I feel the most embodied or the most like, you know, in myself and balanced between my mind and my body. But yeah, I did see a lot of that too. And it's just like, that's why I like to bring things back to basics. And this is why I tell people like, just only come to me if you really want to know like what's going on, and really starting from a strong foundation, because you can build the best fucking house on the worst foundation, it'll crumble. And I'm not about saying, oh, I value parenting well, I value healing, I value all this stuff, but I don't actually want to learn what's going on. I just want to watch reels and learn it that way. It just doesn't work that way. The stuff is just like, it just requires a bit more than 15 seconds of attention. It requires a way of thinking. It requires certain skills from you, right? Shaking and moving your body is awesome, but is it giving you an emotional skill set? Not particularly. It's like when our child wants something and then we're like, oh, like, let me distract you with this. They're always going to come back to what they wanted. As a parent, are you going to help them work through that frustration and grief if you say no, that they can't have it? Or are you going to distract them, have that trapped in there, then they're going to pick up on it later, then you're going to get frustrated and be like, it's just, it changes the whole dynamic and the whole process, and we can just get in there.
This is such a good analogy for life, because I really see that in parenting too. It's like, here's this amazing skill. You can, you know, if, for example, you know, you might be going through that phase with your kids where they just say no to everything. Like, would you like this? No. Would you like this? No. And I love, you know, some of the parenting that's like, you give them two choices. You can have this or this. What would you like? That doesn't actually work in reality. This is what I constantly find about these, like, these kind of real pieces of parenting advice, or like the, you know, the overly woke or overly conscious kind of parenting stuff, is that if I'm not fundamentally different, I actually can't parent different. Like I can understand them, but it's still going to fuck me off if I am not fundamentally changing on a core, like at my actual core. Like if the same shit is still flagging and I'm still getting pissed off by it, and I'm still unable to use all of the skills that I've learned out here in my 15-second reels, I'm never going to actually parent differently.
Exactly. And this is why I think knowledge is so valuable. I want people knowledge, I want to give them wisdom, and I want them to know why they're doing it. If I said like, Britt, go run 10 laps, you'd be like, okay, like it's not going to feel the same. If I'm like, Britt,
okay.
Yeah, if I'm like, go run 10 laps because your blood sugar is going to drop, or whatever it is, like let's just say you're going to bring my blood sugar down. It's just like, when you know why you're doing something, or when you can get into the brain of somebody that you're trying to affect. And this is what I do, whether it's relationships or parenting. I want to know what's going down in your brain. I'm clear, right? I'm on top of my stuff, my individual shit, and I can be in a grounded space where I actually have the capacity to get in your brain, so I can get you to do or communicate what I need you to do in a way that's obviously not manipulative, in a way that's like grounded and healthy. So it's like, I can see maybe the way I'm saying something or doing something, it's not going in, or just working around it. It's like my kids say no to stuff all the time, but it's like sometimes I don't even ask. I'm going to bring the plate, I'm going to put it in front of you because you're going to say no for fun, but when you see it, you're going to want it. So it's like, am I going to get shitty that you said no? Like, no, I know you, I get you. We can work around this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just see it all the time. And especially that piece around people watching the reel and doing the parenting thing, like, do you want this or that? And they're like, oh, it's not working with my child. It's like, yeah, because A, you don't know why you're doing that or how it's supposed to be working. And B, because you don't understand like the other giant picture behind that, you don't know what to do. You're like, this one thing, right? They should stop crying now, or they should do this. It's like, it's just a bit bigger than that. And
Yeah.
love the awareness Instagram has given to parenting, to trauma, to all of
Mm-hmm.
these things. But I think that's where I feel like I come in. I'm like, I think it's time to tie it together and make it make sense versus have it be these like philosophical or idealistic things that we do that, you know, quote unquote, should work.
Yeah, well, I mean, ideas are just ideas unless you actually fucking do something with them, aren't they? Like concepts are awesome, but you need to ground that plane. You know, you need to actually land the plane and know how to move with it. And I mean, you can apply that to literally everything in life. From a parenting perspective, like what are those main things that you see people coming to you with, like those major frustrations, the major things that they're kind of navigating on a day-to-day basis? It's, you know, it's challenging for them. What are you seeing the most?
Do you know what I see is like, it's mostly to do with the parents. It's mostly, I get a lot of people come to me who are incredibly self-aware, but they think that every single thing is fucking up their kids. Like everything is so overthought and there is a huge projection happening. It's like, we need to get on top of your past experiences and your stuff, because at the moment you think you're giving them all of your past experiences, which you're kind of repeating in a different way just by not having your experience and letting them have theirs. Like, and it's okay for them to feel disappointed. It's okay for them to cry. And a lot of the parenting work I do is in helping parents build their emotional intelligence so that they can understand what's happening in their child's brain, like what's normal development, what's the normal stuff we can expect, and then how do we deal with it in a way that's like, oh my God, you know, like today I yelled and like now we think that it's going to result in exactly how we feel about our parents. But if you've been a different person this entire time, and just because you yelled the one time, it doesn't actually lead to the same thing. It's only if you scrap all the rest, right? It's like, I don't know how to explain this. It's like, it's two different environments, two different people. And people are so focused on their own personal experience of being a child that they miss the mark with their own child.
Mm.
And that's actually one of the bigger problems that I see, along with the, I want to follow the pages and do the stuff, but I don't understand any of what I'm doing.
Well, this is like my big thing with the whole conscious world and community. It's like we've been almost like shoved into this corner where we've almost become so neutralized, because it's not okay to like anything and to not like anything and to do anything and to not do anything. You just have to be neutral about everything, and you're on top of your shit and you're incredibly conscious and aware. And like, I just find it exhausting to keep up with all the things I'm meant to be doing and not doing, which I don't really care about. But I just think this is what's happened to us as a generation. I think we are the most, you know, we've grown up with social media. Like, well, typically, I mean, I'm going to speak for myself here. Social media didn't hit until after I left school. So I'm the last generation that got to do school without phones and social media. And I think that's really, how old are you?
28. So
28. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Was it like, because it was right at the tail end of me going to school. So it must have been there when you were like in the later years.
Yeah, I got a phone when I was in year 7, but there was no social media. I think there was like MySpace and stuff that came out, sort of like
MySpace.
Yeah,
What a
MySpace,
vibe.
Bebo, MSN, like
MSN. I do remember MSN. That was a vibe.
Yeah. And Facebook became hot sort of like year 11 and 12 time.
Yes. God, I'm so glad I got to do year 11 and 12 without Facebook. Oh, so happy. Yes, because I'm 32. So what was I even saying? I was talking about, you know, just, I think this really happens with parenting. I mean, I have a couple of my really beautiful girlfriends who I'm incredibly close with, and they're like, how do you have this conversation? How do you do this? I don't want to fuck it up. And I'm like, we're so terrified now of actually parenting our children. Like we're terrified of boundaries and discipline. And, you know, we're bloody obsessed with like rewilding and unschooling and like, like no one wants to go near their children or parenting anymore. I think it's like, it terrifies me that we're actually not willing to go into it and just be like, I'm going to fuck up. Like it's actually not a matter of if, it's just when.
And how.
Yeah, and how, and like, what am I going to do about it? This is my whole process with parenting is like, I'm going to fuck it up. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to not respond perfectly for the rest of my life. Like I'm going to make mistakes. Like, how am I going to repair whatever I rupture? And I mean, I think these are the things that our parents maybe didn't know. I think there was a lot of rupture. Maybe there wasn't a lot of repair. And I just think if I'm going to do one thing differently, I'm just going to repair shit.
Yeah.
That's like my main parenting philosophy.
Oh, I see. Honestly, that is like part of my embodied parenting philosophy, which is like, one, we need to recognize what the triggers are for you in your parenting. But two, it's like you will fuck them up in some way. Like you can't exist as a human in this world without being affected or shaped by things. Like
No.
don't get through life in neutrality. And it's like teaching a skill, right? If I get snappy, I just straight away, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said that. If I had heard that as a child, I think I would be so different right now. But
Mm-hmm.
what I tell people is, I know we really think we're going to fuck them up. I know you think you're really fucked up, but you're actually like, you're doing all right. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
you're okay.
Yeah. And like you're aware and it's just like, we just need to process an emotional experience. That's the part that was missing for you. Well, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, it's like that repair or that conversation. It's like if we maybe heard a sorry, if we maybe, and a lot of time I can recognize as a parent, it's like there's times when you're like, fuck, I shouldn't have done that. And you almost don't want to acknowledge it because you feel bad. And I can imagine for the older generation, they're probably like, but it just wasn't normal to be like, well, sorry. As a child, we just get left there being like, oh, they don't get me. And now that's my fault. So it's like just
Yeah.
these really small things. And if there's anything that I've actually been able to harness, it's like when I'm on top of my stuff, or now that I've done a lot of personal like development and, processed a lot of emotion, it's like I can really hold people where they're at. And I can see our parents keep telling us like, right, it wasn't that bad, or I don't remember it that way. And I can actually see the truth in that now.
Mm-hmm.
See it from your point of view because I was fed, I was clear. You just didn't know. Maybe I needed a little more emotional connection, or
Totally.
we didn't, dig enough for something, or maybe we just didn't establish that kind of relationship. But I believe you when you say like it wasn't that bad as I'm, thinking and projecting it was right now. It's like both can be true. It's like I could have still had that shitty experience, and stuff was probably like all right. It's just that it felt a lot bigger for a child. And that's what I always keep in mind for my kids. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it feels a lot bigger for you than what I'm perceiving right now. And that's the angle that I come in from. Fuck, man, like your brother took your toy. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, how can I help you do this? It's not a big
Mm-hmm.
deal from the outside, but not having an adult in those situations and in those moments feels like a big deal. It feels like you're alone.
Mm.
I think it's just sort of, yeah, recognizing that. And same with our partners. Like it's like they're telling us, I love you, I hear you, like I do respect you. And you're like, no, you're not helping, you don't respect me. It's like there's a message that's not
Yeah.
going over the bridge, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
do love you and they do respect you. And when we can understand how they've seen or experienced a situation, then it's like, oh shit, okay. Like maybe my emotional experience was true, but maybe what you were saying is also true. And that's something
Yeah.
that I have struggled with is holding the two truths at once, even in the medical
Yeah.
world.
Well, we're a society that loves the absolute. We love to be like, this one exact thing is the only truth that exists. And I mean, we've seen so much of that in the last few years. Like there's always so many conversations about that yeah, there is only one truth. This is the only way. And I'm like, no, there's like multiple truths that exist at one time. What
Yeah.
I think is incredibly insensitive from my husband, he might think is like him being really honest with me. And like, that's how much he respects me because he knows that I really value honesty. And so he'd rather do that. And I'm like, you're being mean or like whatever. It's like those two things they're both true.
Yeah.
They're both true. I think we're entering into this era where our generation, I'm going to like claim that I'm part of your generation. I don't know if that's like, yeah, 4 years, surely. Why not? We need to like release our parents from the blame.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, that's like a huge generalization. I'm not speaking to every single person's experience, obviously. But I just find so many people like, my parent did this, my mum did that, my dad did that. And I'm like, I get it. We've got so much information, and we're so fortunate as a generation to know so much about, you know, the inner child, the way that we were raised and how that's taking shape in our own lives, why those things like kind of come full circle and they flare up again when you have your own children and you get an opportunity to like really meet those things that are hard. And also like there has to come a time where we release our parents from like this perpetual blame game that we play. Like I noticed that in myself through like so much of my 20s, like, yeah, like my parents really fucked me. And now I look at my parents. I actually found myself yesterday hanging out with a couple of girlfriends. I was saying, oh, I'm so grateful to my parents. And I just noticed it coming out of my mouth. And I was like, wow, it feels so different to really look back and say, yep, there were hard things. And I'm so grateful for the way that, you know, my parents gave me a lot of freedom in my teens. They gave me so much freedom. And they also just put so much trust in me. And it was so sacred to me, that trust. I didn't want to fuck it up. And so I took the freedom and I was so respectful of the trust that they gave me. And it just built a really beautiful, like just a beautiful, mutually respectful relationship at that time. And I look back and I'm like, that's something my parents just did really well. My mom was like, you can go out, stay out as late as you want, but you call me. Like I'm the one you call and you always come home. And I found myself telling my friends this because we were talking about, you know, raising teenage girls and all of that kind of stuff. And it felt like such a different thing to like be reflecting on my own parents and being so grateful for some of the experiences that I've had with them. Oh, I would love us collectively to get to a point where we just like let our parents off the hook for like fucking us up.
Yeah, and I fully agree. It's like, and this is why I also see things as a process. And
What do you
somebody,
mean? I can't be completely healed in one session?
yeah, it's like this 3 month stuff and I'm not all done. It's like, yeah, it's a process. But we also have to go through a process where it's like for a long period of our lives. And this is where like somebody else I've worked with calls this like a pendulum process. It's like, you know, we go through a period where it's like we had no idea how we were affected. And then all of a sudden we see all the ways we're affected. So we swing the total other way and we're like, fuck, my mum, my dad, my grandma, like everything. This is what everyone did. A lot of people actually get stuck there, but over time, it's like, it's fine to have that process. You just come back in the middle. We're like, I know my personal experience. I know how I felt. I see their role in that. And then I also come back to what was neutral, which is like, right, now I can see the good in it. I can extract the wisdom, the lessons, all of that. And I can see you had no ill intent, and how it's the same as like, it feels so shit. You know, when you try to apologize to someone and you were like, oh, I'm so sorry, like it was an accident. It happened to me the other day. My grandma texted my New Zealand number and I didn't reply because I've been in Australia. And she was so shitty with me. She's like, you didn't reply to me. I was like, I didn't get your text, right? And she just couldn't move on from it. And, you know, I was like, Grandma, like, I'm so sorry. You know, I didn't know that you texted me. And it feels so shit when people are trying to say, I didn't mean to and I didn't know, but the other person can't accept that answer. And we put our parents through that process so much, even our partners. It's like, you're trying to apologize. I'm not being receptive. I'm stonewalling. And then we get the shits when they're not trying to apologize for 3 years straight about it. And it's just like, we have to take, you know, we have to just see it from the outside and kind of understand like dynamics are different, and wanting people being like, oh, mom, I'm so pissed at you. You made me codependent. Wanting your mom to like knock on your door for 3 years, that's fucking keeping that codependent cycle going. It's like sometimes we just need to accept what the answer is and learn when it's our time to process that emotion and take care of it, to say, thank you. I appreciate your apology. I still have some stuff to process around it. If you're willing, if you're open, I'll let you know if there's anything I need from you. Done, dusted. But if you want to, you know, I hate to say it, but act like a child and go the really immature route, that's when there's like more for you to look at individually versus the other person.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that immaturity thing, I notice that a lot, and it comes up so much in romantic relationships. Um, Sometimes I can feel that bubbling within myself where I want to be a child and I'm like, I am acting like a child, or I feel like I want to act like a child and know that's something from my inner child that's like playing out. Um, can you talk more about why does that happen? I was especially interested in when you just said, like, we stonewall. Why do we do that? Why do we stonewall? And why do we start doing these like immature things when we're in the midst of like, not getting what we want, or
Yeah,
being in the middle of conflict?
that was a big reckoning I had to have with myself. When I did the male female brain stuff, when I understood it, I was like, oh shit, now I understand what you've been doing. And now I see where I've been like completely immature or, you know, perpetuating a certain dynamic as well. And it's really, and I'll always harp on about emotional intelligence. Intelligence doesn't mean you're dumb. It means you don't know how to be with an emotion, right? You feel it and then you want to shove it away or snap it, or you lose the ability, like a certain part of your brain, if you're triggered, might switch off. So you lose the ability to like communicate properly. And really, the way I see that in my mind's eye, how it plays out is like I can see, oh, when I was younger, okay, great. My mom's, so nobody came in with me to help me understand what that emotion was. Now I've gotten older, I still have the ability of a 3-year-old to process that emotion, right? We grow in chronological age, but emotionally we're stuck at 3, 4, 5, 6, which is why I think and this is also where the brain comes in to me as well in parenting is a child is born only being able to hold one emotion at a time on purpose, right? They can't hold two things at once until they're older because they've got to master the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're rushed through this when we're younger. It's like, don't be sad, don't do this, share, do this, we don't get to master those. Our skill set's pretty shitty. And this is just what happens when we get older. It's like, and we didn't master that skill, grow that skill, and we didn't like practice it. So it's like, fuck, I'm feeling shitty now with my partner. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to get this out. My lived experience is that if I try and tell you, it's going to end in conflict. So I'm just going to stonewall now. Or I've tried to tell you previously to no avail. And now my only option to keep my shit in is to just block you out and stonewall you because I don't know how to be with this rising emotion. I don't know what to do there. And I don't know how to get that, that piece of information over the bridge and into your brain. And that's something I had to realize was, oh, the way I've been trying to tell him is the way that a female would take it, right?
Mm.
Very often through like, when you just like stonewall your partner and you give them a cold face or you're just like washing the dishes and you're like, you out. A man is receptive to
No,
that.
I don't know anything about that. No.
Yeah. I've
Never done it.
No. But like if I was to come to your house and be like, hey, Britt, I'm here, let's hang out. If you were to give me any inkling of that stone face, I would pick up on it straight away, be like, fuck, something's wrong. She's not herself, da 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 da. And man would be like, hey, and like just keep on going. So when we keep trying to communicate to people in the way that we are, when we're stuck in our own experience, we can't actually see that other experience, or we don't have the skill to get that experience across to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like a two-way street. It's like we need to be met with something there. So that's where I often see it go like a bit funny in relationships. It's because it's like the other person doesn't know how to meet that person there, and the other person's trying to get a message across in some way, but it's not actually getting across.
Yeah. So what do you do in those situations? What's the process? It's like, obviously, yes, we're developing a skill set to, number one, be able to actually be with that emotion. And that's going to help, because then you're not stonewalling anymore and you can possibly get the message over. But like in those moments where you are both doing that, where you don't have that skill set yet, he doesn't have that skill set yet, what happens there? Because then you're in a standoff.
That's what happens in relationships. And this is, I think, knowledge, information, like with that level of awareness, that's where you stay until you grow your level of awareness, until you learn different things, right? That's when we actually start to shift a dynamic, and that can start with one person. But I often see it like we have to be self-aware internally, and then we also need to have external self-awareness, which is like, right, I'm able to like see how I'm actually looking from the outside. Like very often, let's just say I'm working with a client now, and the other day she goes, oh, you know what? She's like, I used to always say like my partner's a narcissist, and she's like, now I think about my behavior from the outside, and I'm like, oh shit, like if I heard my friend saying what I do, they would say I'm abusive, right? That I'm like really hot and cold, that I'm like snappy, and that I'd stonewall them. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we can see ourselves that way. It's like, oh, I'm understanding what's happening from the outside. And honestly, like if I could pass on a tip to anyone, when I'm struggling, I just speak to what's happening, whether it's with my kids or my partner. I'm really frustrated, right? Like just speak, I'm really frustrated right now. I don't know what to do. When we can just meet ourselves there and humanize that, we're not feeding into the tit for tat. It's like, you know what? This is how I'm feeling. I don't have a handle on it right now. Like, give me a hot minute. That will save relationships. Whereas when we get caught up in the emotion and then we bite back or do something, that's when things start to go downhill. That's when you'll get the same from the other person.
Mm.
And same if my kids have a fight, right? Leo, you're feeling this. Tatum, you just experienced that. Right. Got it. If I'm doing the same as an adult, right? Mum, I feel this way. I can see that you feel that way. When I'm just speaking to what's happening, that actually softens people. When we're too caught up in, you didn't get my initial message, that's when it's really hard. We actually just need to, again, find that foundation. This is what I'm feeling right now. This is what I can see you're feeling right now. And very often, if it's with my kids, with a client, with a partner, whoever it is, I'll always speak to what I know of them first. I don't want
Mm.
to talk about me first because walls go up for the other person. I'm going to go, okay, I can see you're feeling really frustrated right now. That actually brings someone back into their own experience, and we start from there versus we keep trying to float over here somewhere and try to work our way back. It's like, let's just start where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Very often ends in a positive result versus, well, you did, and the blame, right? It's like, just talk
Yeah.
about yourself. If you're going to talk about the other person, just, and don't be a dickhead. Don't be like, I observe that you're being an asshole right now. It's like, oh, I see that you're feeling frustrated. I can see that maybe what I'm saying isn't coming across to you. And it's just having really mature communication and keeping it more like factual like that. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of always do this or you always do that, that's really like inflammatory. Like when we hear that, we're like, fuck you, you don't see my good heart when you say that.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah,
kind of makes sense.
it absolutely makes sense. It always reminds me of kind of an analogy that I use with people, which is that when you're like thrashing down the rapids, the first thing that you feel like doing is reaching for the shore. And often the shore is like that one behavior that you can grab onto that can be someone else's fault. Or it can be that one thing that you've done 400 times, even though you know it doesn't work for you, but it's just safer to go there than it is to thrash down the river and just be in the unknown. And that's what I'm imagining when you're saying this, which is like, it's much easier to reach for the shore and grab onto the thing that one thing that they did that fucked you off. It's much easier to grab onto that and be like, well, you said da da da, or you did blah blah blah, than it is to be like, I feel forgotten because I felt that this happened. Or it's easier to blame than it is to just like own your own experience and say, I feel this, or I noticed this, or it felt like this, or I can see that you're frustrated, or I can see that you're defensive. It's so much easier to take the immature route and be like, I'm going to hold on to that one thing that I noticed because it's actually the only thing that's giving me any sort of leverage right now. And that gives me certainty. And I think ultimately as human beings, that's what we want. We want this sense of certainty, of knowing, of righteousness. It's like those things give us, a perceived safety, which is not really safety because obviously we're having an argument in our relationship and it's not fucking working. But ultimately, I think that's what we want. We want this sense of safety, and safety comes from predictability. And I think, often you build those predictable patterns, whether it's in a relationship or with, a goal that you set. And I see this a lot, people setting goals, not doing them because the safe thing is to go back to not doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just hearing that when you're talking, which is, yeah, we'd rather hold on to something than to potentially just open ourselves to maybe just being humbled in a moment and choosing to be mature. And yeah.
Yeah. And being like, one of the first things I changed was kind of that role, which is like, what is it like to be on the receiving end of arguing with me? If I'm like cool, calm, collected, and this is the same with kids, relationships and kids. If I'm grounded, cool, calm, collected, it actually doesn't matter what you do because you'll always come back to what I'm doing.
Mm.
if I'm starting to grab for the shawl and grab for those things, this is when we grab onto, whether it's blaming the other person, sometimes we grab a behavior. It's like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to burst out crying right now because that usually works for me too. I'm just going to threaten this.
Slam a door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like picking that behavior. And normally what I see in long-term couples too is like there's a familiar way of fighting. So it's like we're having a fight, we don't enjoy it, but we always know that the fight ends and there's no divorce or whatever after it. So we just have the same repetitive fight, but there's no new skill being birthed through that. There's no,
Mm-hmm.
and people are often like, oh, and it's the same with alignment culture. It doesn't feel good for me to do that. You know what? It didn't fucking feel good for me to apologize, but I had to learn how to do that because I was wrong.
Oh, amen. Yes, I have such a beef with alignment culture. I'm like, it stopped us all from working hard. It stopped us all from like doing challenging things that make us better fucking people. One of the approaches that I always try in my relationship with Rory is I noticed that we will do that. We'll start an argument and I'm like, oh my God, it's like deja vu. Like we've done this before. And I have this moment, this like sliding doors moment where I'm like, I can either keep going and like, you know, I love words. I'm a word wizard. I can probably win this. Do I either want to continue fighting you and possibly win and feel like a legend because I'm all right and stuff and continue arguing with you and probably not talk to you till tomorrow, which feels just so wonderful. Or I could soften and I could just say, and these are the words that I always use. I'm like, oh my gosh, babe, I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight with you. And instantly he'll go, oh, me neither. And the entire experience is different because someone yielded. And it's like when you stop having that argument where you're like, you're fighting or you're competing for righteousness versus like getting back on the same team of just saying, I don't want to fight with you because I love you. Everything changes.
Yeah.
And we actually start conversing instead of arguing, and it becomes a really different thing. And we can meet each other in a really different way. And it's been something that we've done for a while. And it's always really worked for us. Like, wow, I really don't want to fight. And somehow we're fighting. And it's usually because there's stress or there's tiredness or one of us or both of us are tapped out from kids. And there's just this build up and you just project it out. And I'm like, it's not enough. That's not enough for me to want to have a fight with you. You know,
Amen.
like, yeah, like that's actually not a good enough reason for me to want to fight with you. And you know what's harder? It's fucking way harder to say, I don't want to fight with you than it is to keep fighting.
Yeah. It
And
doesn't feel in alignment at the time.
it does not feel in alignment. Alignment culture wouldn't have a bar of it. No, it doesn't feel aligned. And I think this is the alignment culture piece, is that, oh my gosh, most good things come from blood, sweat, and tears, or they come from like real effort, or they have to come from a place of grit. And it's like, am I actually willing to be humble enough to just not have to be right at this moment and to be willing to have a fucking conversation with you like an adult? It's so ridiculously dumb that that's harder than having an argument with someone, but it's the truth.
Yeah. And this is why I come back to the brain in these situations too, which is the brain works on evidence, right? And if I don't give my brain new evidence, it's only ever going to have the past evidence. So it's like if I don't push myself, and that line is perfect. I don't want to fight right now. That's something that my partner used to say to me, and instantly, oh, weapons down, I would feel so much better. What that does, it gives my brain new evidence, and then I would actually feel more heard going down that road. It's like if I'm yelling things to you because I want you to know this or see this or hear that, I can see sometimes it would like half go in, but then the defenses come back up and it gets spat back out. But if somebody
Yes.
says, hey, I really don't want to fight with you, we just like have a little chat, make up. I'm actually going to have a nice conversation with you after where I'm going to be fully heard and you're going to be fully receptive. And in the long run, like that's the process I'm talking about to people. In the long run, that's what I want. And
Mm-hmm.
I also talk to people about emotional intelligence. It's like you have to learn how to hold that. You have to learn how to hold that uncomfortable moment and stretch yourself in it, not to the point
Mm-hmm.
of urging and dysregulation, but like just that little bit, right? Where it's like you're going to thank yourself 10, 20 minutes from now.
Ah,
Same thing. I can't stop yelling at my kids. You know what? fucking hold it in, because I know you can. I see you do it all the time in public. Build that skill. It's not going to be
Yes.
an alignment for you to suddenly not feel like ever yelling at your kids again, right? I want to punch my kid in the face sometimes. I don't do it. I hold it in and I just sit with that feeling, right? It's just,
Yes.
it is what it is.
Oh, it's 100% true. And I always think about like what kind of environments, um, energetic, emotional, physical, what kind of environments actually foster true and real listening? What
Yeah.
actually makes someone listen? It's certainly not being attacked by an enraged woman. Like that is not what makes people listen. And I actually listened to a podcast years ago when I was back living in New Zealand. And I will never forget, I'm going to absolutely butcher this piece of data. So I'm just paraphrasing here. And it was essentially like what is required for someone who sits on an opposing side of an argument to actually hear you is to hear why it matters to you first about why you're going to say what you're saying, not attacking. It's like not ad hominem. It's not you're attacking the person. You're also not attacking the argument. You're saying it really matters to me for these reasons. And here is what I believe. That instantly telling people why it matters to you disarms people and puts them in a place of actually being able to actively listen to what you're saying. And I think we forget that in our relationships to explain to people why it really matters to us. Like with, I don't know, it could be anything. Why does it matter to me to like hire a nanny to be at home instead of just being like, I'm so tired and you're never around to help and I'm going to hire a nanny? Like, it's not about that. It's like, he's clearly not going to hear that. That's not an environment where he's going to be able to actively hear what I'm about to say. If I go in with something that's like, it really matters to me that I feel a sense of vitality and life force and that it's not all getting drained by like 2 o'clock every day. I was hoping we could have a conversation about potentially hiring a nanny. How does that feel for you? He's instantly disarmed. Like there's things that you do. And I mean, I'm no relationship expert. And I'm certainly no brain expert, but I fucking love communication. Like I love knowing what it takes for someone to really hear what I'm saying. And it's certainly not coming on as the aggressor. And it's definitely not ad hominem attacking the human saying the argument. Those things don't work. And it's almost like going back to that book of like, what is it? How to make friends and influence people.
Yeah.
Disarm people first.
You actually nailed something about getting into the male brain, which is telling them why it's important, what it does for you. Right? If I tell my partner, give me more affection, you never give me more affection. If I say, hey babe, I feel so beautiful, I feel so wanted, I feel so turned on when you give me affection, that's a reason for him to give that to me. But if it's like, you never do this, you never do that, that doesn't feel like a really nice invitation to do that more.
No.
And it's not conducive to healthy relationships either. And I feel sad for the divorce rates and for the amount of broken families and people going through really big hardships and having to be a single parent simply because of some really basic stuff. I feel sad for the people being labeled with narcissism or whatever simply because they just couldn't get the foundations quite right. And that's not to say bad things don't happen and people shouldn't split up. It's just that there's like a big, it's like having a puzzle and a whole chunk of the puzzle is missing. And if you're using a couple of pieces to try and build a whole picture, and it's just not going to work.
Well, I mean, ultimately, other than like mirror neurons and observation, what kind of skill set does anyone actually ever get to learn about how to relate to another human being?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you go through relationship school when you hit 18 and like you learn how to communicate with the opposite sex and you understand that. Like, no one's learning those things. I mean, other than people that come into Portal by Alex. But it's true. Like, everyone's winging it. Everyone's figuring it out. And I guess, yeah, I can so see how this happens. I see this in people all throughout my life. I've seen this in myself. You just get stuck in those loops of like, this is who we are now. Like, we are the people who do this. We are the people who behave like this. We are the people who argue like this. And I think unless one of you at least is willing to, and it's not about personal development to me. Like, what was that?
No, like you don't even need to do personal development.
No, it's actually more to me about humility.
Yeah.
And like, who's actually willing to be humble enough to, put their weapons down and remove themselves from an argument and enter into a conversation. Like, who's the most willing to do that? Because you need at least one of you to do that.
Yeah. And acknowledging when you're not. I'm too fired
Yes.
up right now. I can't actually have a conversation right now.
Yep.
That saves a lot of fights. That's saved me and my partner a lot of fights. I hear
Mm-hmm.
you. I'm just not in a place where I can actually have this conversation right now. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Do you know how many times my partner used to be like, I don't want to talk right now? And I would be panicking and be like, I want to talk right now. And
Mm-hmm.
then what? Oh my God, he pushed me away. He's fucking avoidant. He's this. No, he's
Mm-hmm.
actually telling me, and I'm not accepting the answer. And I don't have the ability or the emotional intelligence to hold that and to say, you know what? Fuck, I wish we could talk about it right now, but we can't. And I need to learn to sit with that because we're going to have a much better conversation when he has a breather. Am I going to keep poking it and keep doing it? It never ended well. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the awareness piece, right? That's like the intelligence piece of being like, okay, there's not something wrong with him because he doesn't want to converse right now. Like my man's, he's a man of very few words. And I often have found myself, we've been together for many years now, but I would find myself in these situations where he just wouldn't be saying anything. And I would find that silence so eerie and concerning and stressful because I'd be like, are
Well,
you plotting my murder? Like, what are you thinking? I don't know what you're thinking. And it would make me panic. And so then I'd keep going in the hopes that he would communicate. And obviously he never fucking would. And I would, yeah. And as I kept going, it kept getting worse. I was not getting what I needed. He was not getting what he needed. And
yeah.
shit never worked out. I feel like you were going to say something there about that.
Yeah, no, well, that's another male female brain thing is that females like to have the back and forth.
Yes.
Males don't communicate, they actually listen in silence and they like to be listened to in silence. So when we're coming in and why? Because space means disconnection, which our brain values
Yes.
connection, which we start to go in panic mode. And then we're operating in two different systems and we're both getting frustrated. And he's not
Mm-hmm.
feeling heard. And what I've done the most work on in my relationship for myself is to be a nice person to be in a relationship with, which is like I can accept an apology, I can speak in what I feel, I can tell you when I need space, I can
Mm-hmm.
understand what's happening for you, I can listen to you the way you need, right? And then I can tell you how I want to be listened to and all those things so that it's being reciprocated, but in our individual ways. If
Yes.
I'm saying something's wrong with you because you don't want to do it the way that feels good for me,
Yeah.
well, then that's my problem. That's not really their problem.
Yes. And again, that's like humility,
Yeah.
really taking responsibility for the fact that we're not perfect humans and we have shit to work on. And part of those things to work on is like who we are in our relationships. And this was a huge reckoning. This has probably been the biggest reckoning for me in my own marriage is that, yeah, Rory, he does not like to respond straight away. He doesn't have the ability to do that. He cannot, like he doesn't fire back in the same way that I like to bounce around, as you were saying. And so one of the ways that I'll communicate with him, like if it's something hard or even if it's something easy, hey babe, you don't have to answer me right now. Of course, go away, think about it. But I just wanted to pop this here to pick up whenever you've had a chance. And then I'll insert thing I want to discuss. And then I'll give him a kiss and off I go. And like, he'll always come back to me. Sometimes it takes days.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's not frustrating. It's that I have to expand my tolerance for that. And like my tolerance and my patience for the experience. And it's about holding that emotion in the moments between so that he can have an experience that he wants to have. It's not just about what I need. It's about what we both need. And I think there's that real thing. And again, I get really like fired up about these like masculine and feminine polarity teachings where it's like, he's there to serve you. I'm like, yes, kind of, not really. But I get like frustrated by that because it leaves such little space for nuance. And I think it leaves a lot of women feeling incredibly entitled to so much from their men in so many different ways. And I'm not saying they don't need to be epic. I'm not saying they don't need to be fucking phenomenal. I'm not saying they don't need to listen. I'm saying, I think when we go in with these like hyped up expectations or entitlements about like what they should be giving us as like alpha men, I think we're definitely going to be disappointed. Do you have a lot of experience with that? Like, do you find that there is a big kind of portion or swell of women with those expectations or entitlements.
Yeah, and it's like, because they're not getting their needs met, because they're not able to effectively communicate something across. And what a big portion of the work I do, for example, in Interconnected, is how you see your man. Because if you're going to see him as this robot who should do everything and who should be like you and who should, there's no room for him in that. Like, how is he going to feel good doing that? Like, how is he, it's like, I don't want to tell him what to do. I want him to want to do it. How is he going to want to do it if there's no room for him in anything he wants? If it's just the way that you want it and how you want it and when you want it. And also, I have a big piece about taking responsibility for your own needs. It's like, hey, flagging in myself, I'm a shitty human if I don't go to the gym regularly. Great. I need to tell you, I need to go to the gym more regularly so I don't feel like this. So I don't blame you. So you're not the brunt of everything. It's not your job to say, hey, babe, the last time you worked out was the 17th of November. Would you like to go to the gym? That's my job, right? And
Yes.
it's really unhealthy. And I see a lot of people wanting their man to be a certain way because they want somebody to overfunction for them. My big thing is, if you're not going to do that for yourself, please do not expect that person to do that for you. If you don't even want to talk about it, don't expect him to do it. Like, please just save yourself the headache. And honestly, when I first started shifting my mind and my perspectives around this, I felt so sad for men. I was like, there is so much noise and loudness about feminism and women and all this stuff. There's actually no room for men. They're actually like, we don't even see like how amazing their true essence is, like how loving, giving, like they are so protective, so amazing, and they get no room to show that because we want to receive everything in a female way. We're not letting them even show us their true masculine essence. And that's where you have to start with, like, ripping it right back and building that correct foundation, because if you're going to start from the middle, it's never going to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I fucking love all of that. And it's so true. And I've always been just never identified as a feminist. I've never, ever, ever claimed that title purely for that reason, is that I have amazing men in my life and I love watching how different they are to me. And I really revere that. And that doesn't take anything away from how much I also revere women. But I do think that we've become a little bit of an entitled bunch. Obviously, this is a generalization. It's not everyone, but like we've become really entitled to like how they love us. And I'm like, but have you ever let them love you how they want to love? Because it's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like it's actually pretty amazing. Yeah. And I think, again, it's kind of like it's like the Instagram model like really gets us into these loops where we see, the conscious man portrayed in a specific way. And if you do this, he'll serve you. And then if you do this, he'll do this. And it's like this real like cause and effect situation that we've got going on. And I'm like, fuck, have you ever just tried to be in a relationship where you weren't trying to get him to do something?
Yeah.
I think we're so entitled to like, yeah, them being a specific way for us to like serve the feminine. And I'm like, I feel like we're missing something really huge here, which is that I loved the phrase that you said, we're trying to get them to overfunction for us.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you also have to swing and become like hyper independent and, all of those things. Like I think you and I are both not saying that. It's like you don't have to overfunction for them either.
No, you don't have to be doing everything all the time, because that's why you feel shitty in the first place and why you want them to overfunction for you, because you want them to acknowledge what you've done and that, hey, maybe I need a break. But maybe the way that you see him, the way that you see your environment, the way that you relate to your own needs is different to how he sees it, how he relates to his needs, relates to a lot of other stuff. And a lot of women hate when, even politely, if men put them in their place, like, hey, but you can absolutely go to the gym if you need to. They're like, no, I can't. It's like, you actually can. You actually just need to cultivate a space and an environment that supports that. And yeah, and especially having sons, I was like, wow, would I actually, like, how would I feel if they came home with a girlfriend who was like, well, you're the masculine, so you do that. Oh, you know what? Leo Tatum, you haven't read this fucking book and you didn't go on that retreat, so you're pretty much fucking really shit. It's like, wow, that is so shit for them. Like, I would
Yeah.
feel so offended if I was a fly on the wall for a conversation with my partner and he was like, yeah, Alex should really read this book, and fuck, I have to save some posts to send her, you know, this is how she should cut her hair, whatever it is. I would feel so shit. I'd be like, oh my God, like they don't love me.
Yes. Yeah.
And we think that that's normal and that's nice and that, you know, it's so shit to be on the receiving end of that. It actually just doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense to constantly have your significant other trying to edit you
Yeah.
into another way of being. And I mean, again, this was like such a huge thing for me, but like when I first got into, all of this work, which was probably like 7 or 8 years ago now, I mean, got into it in a really big way too. I remember being like, babe, you should listen to this podcast. And he was like, nah. I'm like, babe, you should read this post. Nah. And he constantly pushed back on me. And I really hated it. It was probably for a year. I really hated it. And I am so fucking grateful, because there is nothing that turns me on more than a man who knows himself.
Yeah.
Like there was something about that where I was just like, I love being told no. I love that you don't pander to me. I love that you encourage me to be exactly who I am by being exactly who you are. Like there's so much power in that. There's so much beauty in that. And I think we love trying to edit men.
We
We
do.
love trying to edit them to be a very specific way so that they're in service to the feminine and that they're worshiping us all the time. And all of these like caveats that we put on, like, you're only, good at being in a relationship as a man if you do X, Y, Z. I'm like, fuck, could you imagine if they said that to us? That, like, feminists would be marching.
Well, look at how women respond when it's like, oh, it's so great when you cook and clean. We're like, oh my God. But like, imagine hearing that like all the time. And to, it's like such a female brain thing. If you think we value connection, it's like, hey, I actually want you to read this post because I want to feel connected to you over this. When we can communicate that across, instead of like, hey, read this, you're not good enough unless you read this. If we say, hey, I just read this thing, I'd love to have a chat about it, it would make me feel really connected to you. What's he going to be more open to? If it's not coming, if he's going to feel like it's coming from a place of fuck, I don't care about it. It's like when my partner tries to make me watch golf videos. I don't give a fuck, man. Like, I really don't give a fuck. But if he's like, hey, I found this so funny, I would love to laugh at it with you, I'll give that the time of day. I'll watch that.
Absolutely.
If you're going to start sending me golf reels and YouTube videos, like, I'm probably not going to really be into that. Why are they so bad if they don't want to receive all of our stuff all the time? Why can't that just be your journey and the thing that you're into? And then if there's anything that's really important, cultivate that conversation in a nice way, like learn that skill versus, fuck, we're going to get divorced because I've tried this for 3 years and like, you're fucked.
Why don't people want to learn that skill?
Because this sounds really bad, but they're emotionally immature. So they're stuck in that childlike way of thinking. And because they feel like they've exhausted all options in terms of, let's just say I'm a female, I've now exhausted all options because this is how, if I was sending this message, this is how I'd receive it. Now I've tried 20 times to send this message, all in female ways, and you haven't received that message. Therefore, the problem is you and not me. And they haven't done any work to understand, like, it's like sending a letter. What if you put it in the post box with no address? Where's it going to go?
Yeah.
It's not going to
Right.
go.
You are the queen of analogies. Queen.
I know. I'm going to take the title. I love the analogy.
Yeah. It's just, it's so true. We don't want to, and I mean, this is, let's zoom out on that analogy more broadly, because, and I feel like this is kind of the alignment culture thing as well, is that yes, there's like this immaturity to it. I also see this a lot in like people with goals, people that want to achieve something and then go, yeah, but what's required to actually achieve that goal is A, B, C, D, and E. And I don't really like the sound of A, B, C, D, or E. And so I think I will just continue to say that I want that goal, but there's all of these other reasons why I can't have that goal. And then I will blame those reasons for why I'm not at the goal. And it's the same in a relationship, right? Like the reason I don't have the dream relationship is because I'm actually not willing to do A, B, C, D, and E.
Yeah.
And I just see that everywhere. And I'd rather blame whatever it is, mum and dad, or like my kids, because I don't have time to like go and work on my business, or like whatever the thing is. Like we would rather feel more obligated to the reasons why we can't do something than to the reasons why we should do it anyway. It's like this piece around grit, humility, willingness, like the fucking effort that's required to like drive down a different neural pathway. I mean, I can feel where my neural pathways are worn, and I can feel where I want to go in a particular direction. And I can feel how fucking hard it is to like turn the steering wheel and go somewhere else. There is nothing that would make me not turn. Like that, like it doesn't matter how hard it feels or how much I have to like, yeah, eat my own words because I'm changing direction. It wouldn't matter because I'm so much more obligated to the goal of like ultimately coming into like a beautiful connected relationship, or like reaching a goal or achieving something that I set my mind to. I'm way more obligated to that than I am to the discomfort that's required to get there. I don't think that many people are wired that way. And I clearly know that you're wired that way because you've been telling me this whole time that you are. But it's like, what's the question I have for you around this? It's kind of like, do you think that that's like nature or nurture? Do you think there are people who are better at turning the steering wheel and driving down a different neural pathway?
This is part of what I do in Alchemize as part of that internal skill set.
Right.
And I'm sure you see it in business where it's like, okay, let's just say the letter analogy. I could write the most fucking beautiful letter with the best handwriting and the nicest paper. If I'm not addressing it to anyone, that message isn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I could have the best course ever. If I'm not doing that, like, it's like what I hired you for. I'm having a hard time getting this message across to people. I made the stuff. How do I tell people now? Like,
yeah.
how do I send the letter? Like, where am I sending it to?
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about all that sort of stuff, it's like, that's the internal skills. That's the process that we need to recognize and flag. It's like, I know my goal is to build a good relationship with my kids, and I value that much more than wanting to yell. And when I know what I'm doing in the long run, I know when I'm holding in like the yelling, or when I'm really like trying my best to like make a situation flow, I know that's the goal I have in mind. And very often, and this process is called blending. So if people's, let's just say one of their inner children comes up and they have a behavior or a thing that they normally do, let's just say that's yelling or whatever it is, or let's just say it's holding their needs in until, very last moment, whatever it is. What we need to do is recognize that that's what's happening. If you're not clocking onto that or recognizing that in the first place, it's really hard to turn the steering wheel. You actually have to look at, fuck, this is the road I'm driving down right now.
I don't like this road. Yeah.
And, and it's different, and it's really, there's something that's called the gap in psychology, which is everybody has that 1 second gap to make that choice.
Yep.
And what I think happens a lot of the time is people blend with an inner child that wants somebody to look after them. They feel like, and I know especially for women, it's like, I feel like I have so much more responsibility already. I want somebody else to take this responsibility. It's very often that you should let go of the other responsibilities or some other stuff, or reframe your relationship with those, so that you can take responsibility for yourself in that moment. That's the process. And it's not, and this is also like going back to my point before, you are not going to energy heal yourself into a new neural pathway. It just does not happen that way. You're not going to breath work yourself into it. It's actually like, that's part of that internal skill set, is what you're talking about, that grit, that awareness, that big vision, that thing. And I do have a little bit of beef with manifesting for this reason. I'm so sorry, you're not going to manifest all the shit you want. You don't have it, not because you're not a good person, but because there's some things that you're not willing to look at. There's some things that you're not willing to do. And I'm going to manifest a 6-pack, but I'm not going to go to the gym. Like, that's how it sounds to me. It's like, okay, well,
it's dumb. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And what I'm picking up here, and I don't know if you would actually agree with this, but this is what I'm noticing, like that there is, you said emotional immaturity as a reason for people not necessarily being able to like take those opportunities in the moment and turn them into something different. Do you think that's the same with people who have like a bunch of ideas and don't take action? Like there's an emotional immaturity there where they're actually not the people who have enough awareness yet to move differently towards a goal. Like, is that what you are ultimately saying, do you think?
Yeah, and it does tie into trauma, like absolutely ties into childhood.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody didn't help you build up that skill, now you're an adult and you have to teach yourself that skill. That's why you're craving
Mm-hmm.
to do it for you, because you were craving an adult to help you with that when you were younger, right? And it's also unfamiliar. Like you said before, the brain loves familiarity. It's like
Yeah.
having ideas feels familiar to me. Putting them out there vulnerably is not familiar. That feels scary.
Mm,
That's not a muscle I've built yet. And my beef with the trauma world is like, okay, that's great that you've identified that maybe it comes from trauma. Is that your reason now to stay in that forever? Is that the reason why you
yeah.
can't make any other choice? Like, absolutely not. It's like we need to see, like, it's not, the problem isn't that you feel that way, it's your relationship to that. It's like, if I
100%.
can see that and shift my relationship to that, great. If I can see that, but I don't do anything about it, that's the real problem.
Yes. And I mean, how many people do you think are walking through the world, like just feeling like they've had a trauma and now they're just a traumatized person and they're like, that's me forever now.
Yeah.
It just like it forges with part of their identity. And I know I've told you this personally before. Like I had a really large sexual trauma when I was in my teens, and it deeply affected my sexual relationships until I met my husband. And for all of that time, it was like that trauma was the reason I couldn't have beautiful sexual relationships with people. It was the reason I couldn't have it. And then when I met my husband and, you know, we got pregnant, we were having twins, it became the reason I wanted to have an amazing sexual relationship with my husband. I was like, I don't want this to be my story forever. Like the exact same experience was my reason for not walking the path. And then that exact same experience was my reason for walking the path of actually coming into a place of completion with that trauma. So that I'm not walking around forever as a traumatized being. It's almost like, you know, like to bring this back full circle, the goal that people hold and like the discomfort of kind of walking towards it and trying to achieve it. The discomfort is the reason that they won't walk it until it comes to a point where they develop enough emotional intelligence or like, you know, move beyond those like inner child kind of hurt and all that stuff. And then that discomfort is a reason to start pursuing it because you can see that on the other side of that discomfort is something amazing. Like the
Yeah.
exact same scenario is either a motivation or a deterrent for different people.
Yeah. That's a really nice way to put it. Often I just tell people, I'm like, just don't come to me until you're sick of your own shit. Way was much nicer. But it's, yeah, that's what it is. It's like if you're still not done, and it doesn't mean, and we can be in this process in multiple, like maybe I'm not done grieving something or processing something in this area yet or in this situation, but I'm done with it over here. It's like we have to learn how to be with multiple things at once. It's not like when you turned over every single little thing that ever happened with your mum, then you're healed or then you're ready or then you can move on from that. It's like life happens and things surface all the time. People
Mm.
want this hard and fast, clear answer, like, do you have time to heal? Hey, Alex, I think I found this core wound. And like,
Mm.
how do I integrate it? It's like you miss the whole point of how this works. It's like it's great we want to understand it that way, but it presents itself differently. Like there's people who end relationships, quote unquote, heal themselves, then they get into a new relationship and then other stuff comes up. And you're like, oh my God, it's like you need to learn how to be with that. You need to learn how to work with that, how to process it. Like, how do you build your emotional intelligence to go, fuck, I'm flagging what's happening. This is how I work with it. This is how I
So
communicate.
what's happening in a situation like that? Like someone's, exited a relationship, they, you know, heal so whole and healed. Then they get into another relationship and more shit surfaces, and then that ends. And then you know, spent all this time by myself, now I'm whole and healed. And then what's happening there? Like, what is that pattern?
That is, you've never closed a loop properly. So when I do, for example, portal therapy, it's like, let's just say there's been an open loop and your system is always seeking homeostasis, right? It's always seeking wholeness. It's always seeking that. So it's constantly presenting you with things for you to recognize and go, right, I need to actually close that loop. So when people just take the trigger away. It's like, okay, do you have an allergy because you have a gut health issue? Right. So it's like, even if you remove that food, if you don't solve your gut health issue, you're going to bring the food back in and still have a reaction to it.
Yet another amazing analogy. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like, if you never changed your relationship to that thing, or if you never, for example, it's not that people don't dig deep enough, it's just that we don't know how to do it, or we try to do it mentally. It's like, yeah, but your brain does certain things. So I need to, when I do portal therapy, it's like there's certain areas that I disarm, and then there's certain areas that I switch on to get in there, basically. And when we do that and process the emotion with it, you're then presented with the same situation, but because that loop is closed, the
You'll
emotional
do it differently.
yeah.
Yeah.
And while also saying, if you never built the skill to communicate, you don't suddenly have the skill to communicate. That's still the thing that you need to build upon and recognize.
Yes.
But it's just that that emotional charge is gone. So it's like a
Yeah.
multitude of things. It's like the core reason, the root cause, plus the skill, plus also recognizing things as they are. I feel like, I don't know how to word this probably, but it's like when I look at things, I see it as like a movie in front of me almost. Even if you and me are having a conversation, I'm in my body, but I can also feel what's happening for you, and I can also look at it from the outside. That's how I know I'm regulated, right? My brain's available. People need to build that skill up. And right, and that means right doing certain things to regulate yourself and doing personal work, but in relationships, in parenting, you need to build that skill up so that you can see things like that from the outside and be like, this is your experience, this is my experience, this is it from the outside. If we can learn how to do that, it's not that you're fucked, but it's just like,
No, I love that. You're fucked.
well, yeah, it's kind of like you're not actually addressing something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard to address a relationship situation when you are single,
Yeah. Well,
right?
you have no,
You have no
um,
trigger. There's nothing there that's like activating the thing that keeps coming up when you get in relationships. And so then when you're by yourself, you're like, oh my God, I'm not getting triggered anymore. This is amazing. I feel so healed.
it was them.
It
Yeah.
was them. And then you go get in another relationship, you're like, fuck, my shit is still there.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, there it is. Yeah. Um, yeah, I see that a lot.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, I
And
could imagine.
very often people do that cycle multiple times, and then they get to the place of, okay, I see that now. I recognize that this is me. Right. That's what I want to talk to you. Or that's where I'd love to sort of shorten that process for people and say, hey, this could actually be an option of what's happening in your life. And very often what I say in Alchemize to people, like the trauma one, is if you have a consistent and recurring problem, that's like something internal to do with you. There's
Yeah.
things that are just like, fuck, that's life, or that happens. The
Mhm.
random things, the consistent, the recurring, those sort of things, like that's something to look at in here, right? It's not that
Yes,
everybody else is an asshole except for you. It's that there's something for us to figure out.
absolutely. And again, to kind of like use that being single versus being in a relationship as an example here. I just think it's really fascinating. You know, we do all of this work on, journaling, or we're doing modalities, or we're doing a talk therapy session or whatever. But if you don't actually take what happens in like a portal therapy session, in Alchemize or Interconnected with You, in any of those other modalities, and then go fucking live it in your actual life, it literally means nothing.
Yeah.
Like it means nothing. And I'm constantly talking to people about this. It's like, I love that you've had this amazing piece of awareness. I love that you've seen a pattern. That is actually step one. And that is great. And I'm very jazzed, but please go and move differently. Like you have to be live streaming it. You have to be doing it in your actual life. You have to be living the new awareness. I think that's such a thing that's missing. And again, I feel like you'll probably tell me that that's like an emotional maturity thing. Do you think,
Yeah.
to be able to go and like live stream, live that shit in your life?
Yeah. Well, that's where you're like, okay, I always bring it back to the gym. It's like, did the PT help you do that round? They've given you the program. Oh my God, it feels a little bit scary and wobbly to go and do it by myself now. I need to go and figure out the machines, and you realize where you need to build skills. And it's the same in
Mm-hmm.
real life. And that's often where people don't know how to hold that. They come back, they're like, oh my God, I'm still fucked up. Right. We did it together, it was fine. And then I went to do it by myself and it wasn't. It's like, no, you're not actually fucked up. You need to build that skill now. It's
Yeah.
I don't know where this translation was lost between emotional and mental and just physical things, because it's
Yeah.
the same process on both ends.
And that like skill of, you know, as you said, like you've got to, you need to build that skill now, and there's like a gap. For me, this seems like the most logical thing, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but the way that you actually close that skill set gap is by practicing.
Yeah. Do you see a
Yeah,
baby
like
and fall down and go, fuck, I wasn't built for walking. I'm pretty fucked up.
I'm so fucked up. Take me to therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, you just try it again so many different times.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. Sorry, that's the most boring piece of advice, but I don't know where.
No, I love it. I think it's boring because it's so true. Like, and I mean, this is what I'm really getting at here is like, that is a metaphor for life. People are like, I don't have the skill. I'm like, you're not going to get it by telling me about it. You need to go practice it. You need to do it poorly lots of times until you start developing a better skill set.
Yeah. And I see it the exact, if you said, Alex, I want to heal this thing, or you said, Alex, I want to learn to play guitar, I'm not going to do breath work and then play guitar. But you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's two completely separate different things. It just
Hmm.
doesn't work that way. But I think, and I very often talk to people about being in the driver's seat. I was
Hmm.
like, this isn't Uber where you hop in the back and I take you there. I was like, this is like you're driving. Like I'm telling you directions, I'm guiding you, but
You're an
you
L plater. I'm the instructor. Let's go.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
ultimately, like you're gonna have to practice that, and you're gonna have to stumble, fuck up, fail, whatever it is, because
Hmm.
that's where you're gonna learn. There's no other way that exists to learn. Like I can
Yeah.
give you stuff that's gonna make your journey easier, shorter, feel supported, feel normal, but ultimately, like you have to go and do that. And
Yeah.
same as parenting, have to build up your skills because I know you have to go and do that. You have to fall over. You have to like
Yeah.
stuff has to happen.
There are no free rides.
No,
You
and
just, yeah.
mean I have to make your life difficult to teach you. Like life will
Yeah.
do that. Make it,
Life will do that for you.
yeah, like don't you worry, right? It's like I'm just here to guide you, to teach you, to give you good advice that would help your life, that would make your life easier when that happens. But
Mm,
ultimately, like you're still living your life.
yes. Well, Portal by Alex. Thank you so, so much for coming on today. I'm so sorry we had such a lengthy prelude, which was an hour of us trying to figure out the internet. I'm so sorry to take up so much of your time, but thank you so much for just delivering the goods and yeah, sharing all of your amazing wisdom. We will link up all of the places where people can find you and all of the things that people can join you in. We might even put a special link in there for a portal therapy situation because I feel like people are going to be like, what on earth is this magic when they listen? So thank you so, so much. Is there anything that you feel is left unsaid that you want to bring to the table?
Just a massive thank you. Like I love a good juicy conversation. The only, I guess, parting words I'll leave people with is probably to just do the thing, right? Whether that be, I care about this, I want to do that, great, learn it. Don't watch reels on it. Don't, you know what I mean? Like, that's great, but just go and do the thing. Um, we love the spiritual, we love the woo woo. It's not going to fix your life. Like, you're not going to manifest it. You're not going to, you know what I mean? I hate to be a party pooper, but there's like a process of things that has to happen. And I also just think embrace the humanity, embrace this,
Yes.
how to be with life versus,
Yeah, you're not getting it wrong because you're human.
yeah,
You're getting it right because you're human.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. Thank you so much. You are an absolute bloody gem.
Thank you.